So we have a really fascinating set of sources today. They're anchored by some excerpts from a piece titled The Meaning Crisis. Work is Identity, Not Just Income.
Yeah, it's a really heavy one.
It is. It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is it's meant to be a truly open exploration. Like, we are intentionally avoiding any neat conclusions or, tidy endpoints today.
Right, because, the material just doesn't offer them.
Exactly. There's no bow to tie on this one. Instead, what we're looking at are these massive, intricate feedback loops between, emerging technology, human psychology, and, global politics.
It's a huge web.
Yeah. And the core question that we're trying to unravel today is, what happens when machines don't just automate our daily tasks, but they actually automate our identities? So we want to, ask better questions and look at the massive blind spots in how we currently measure societal progress.
Right. And that premise really requires us to step back and question the very instruments we use to measure a healthy society in the first place. Because standard economic analysis it's incredibly focused on quantifiable outputs.
Sure.
We look at income, we look at overall productivity, we measure gross domestic product.
The numbers on the spreadsheet.
Exactly. But according to our source material, by hyper-focusing on those specific metrics, we are completely missing the core of the social contract. Like, we are missing the metric of, quote, meaning.
Wow. Yeah, meaning. And, I think the best way to visualize this blind spot is to think about a doctor checking on a patient in a hospital.
Okay.
So the doctor walks in, checks the patient's pulse, takes their blood pressure, looks at their oxygen levels, and all the numbers on the monitor, they're all green.
Right. Everything looks perfect.
Right. The chart objectively says this patient is healthy, good to go.
Mm-hmm.
But that same doctor is completely ignoring the fact that the patient is in severe, visible psychological distress.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the chart says they're fine, but the patient feels like they are dying.
That is a really profound way to look at it.
Yeah, the metrics we're using are just entirely divorced from the reality of the patient's actual experience.
Right. And if you apply that to the macroeconomic scale,
right,
we are looking at a workforce that is generating incredible output, right?
Yeah.
But they're experiencing this profound internal crisis. And the text grounds this whole idea in the concept of work as identity.
Work as identity.
Yeah, because we tend to analyze labor purely as a transactional exchange, Like, tasks performed for a wage, you do the thing, you get the money.
Right.
But the psychological reality is that work forms the scaffolding of a person's ego.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The author points out that we don't just do jobs, we inhabit them. Like, people say, I'm a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
I'm an engineer, I'm a teacher.
Yeah. If you think about, just think about how you introduce yourself at a party, right?
Oh, yeah, always.
The very first question someone asks is, so what do you do? And you don't respond by listing your daily operational tasks. Like, you don't say, I parse data into spreadsheets and I facilitate communications between vendors.
No one says that.
Right. You say, I am a logistics manager.
Exactly.
You literally use the words I am. It's a statement of being.
It really is. And those job titles, they function as social positions.
Yeah.
They are narratives of self that provide dignity. Like, the internal monologue for a professional is built on this premise that they spent years training for their specific role.
Right.
They mastered a complex domain, and that mastery justifies their place in the social hierarchy.
Is their value.
Exactly. It tells them why they matter to the broader community.
Which, that sets up a massive collision course when artificial intelligence scales up.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if work is identity, then the introduction of cognitive automation, it shifts this from an economic discussion to a deeply psychological one.
Right.
And the source material argues that AI compresses what it calls the scarcity premium on that work. Yeah, the scarcity premium. That's a key phrase here. Yeah. Because the scarcity premium is the absolute foundation of professional value.
Right.
Think about it. If you spend a decade learning complex case law or mastering fluid dynamics, your knowledge is scarce.
Right, not everyone can do it.
Exactly. And because it's scarce, it commands a premium, both in terms of financial compensation and, social respect.
Right.
But then AI enters that equation and fundamentally alters the supply side of that knowledge.
Okay, so let's unpack this for a second because I want to push back a little.
Sure.
This is where the historical comparisons always crop up. Like, a lot of people look at this and say, well, we survived the mechanical loom.
Right.
We survived the tractor, the assembly line. Automation has disrupted labor for centuries, frankly.
Oh, yeah, completely.
So my initial thought reading this was to wonder, well, why is cognitive automation any different than physical automation? And that's the most common reaction, right? The historical default is to view all automation as kind of identical. But the mechanics here are completely different.
How so?
Well, the Industrial Revolution largely automated physical labor.
Okay.
Right. It replaced muscle, it replaced endurance, it shifted people from farms to factories.
Right.
But in doing so, it actually created new avenues for human expertise to manage those very machines.
I see.
But the current wave of AI, it's aimed directly at the automation of the expertise itself.
Right. So it's taking aim at the exact thing that justifies that whole, I spent years training for this narrative.
Exactly.
The disruption isn't just about, physical exertion anymore. It's about the cognitive superiority that a professional spent their whole life cultivating.
That's spot on, because when a cognitive task that took a human, say, 10 years to master, when that can suddenly be executed by a machine for a fraction of a cent, or even handled locally on a $2,000 server in a closet somewhere,
right,
the scarcity premium just collapses entirely.
Right.
And the economic field describes this very clinically, right? They call it wage compression.
Wage compression.
Yeah, the financial value of the work drops because the capability is no longer rare.
Right.
But the psychological field, they use a much heavier term. They call it identity dissolution.
Identity dissolution.
Yeah.
Man, that captures the actual human experience so much better than wage compression.
It really does.
And the text makes this really sharp, almost painful distinction here regarding how that dissolution feels for the person.
Yeah.
It says the worker's expertise isn't rendered worthless. It's rendered worth less.
Two separate words.
Two separate words. Worth less.
And that nuance is so critical to understanding the modern worker's predicament right now.
Right.
Because if the expertise were completely worthless, well, the job would just disappear overnight.
Right. They'd just be fired.
Exactly. But that's not what's happening in most cases. The worker is still showing up. They're still sitting at the same desk, typing on the same keyboard, doing the work. But the social recognition that accompanied that expertise, the deference from their peers, the status in their community, it just begins to evaporate.
Wow.
And the text observes that the tasks remain, but the meaning has drained completely out of them.
Gosh. So you're basically just going through the motions.
Yeah.
But the internal narrative of, this is why I matter, that's just been completely hollowed out.
Yes.
Because a machine can do what you do.
Yeah.
And it can do it instantly.
Instantly.
And this brings us right back to our doctor analogy for the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Because the individual is experiencing this profound identity dissolution, right? They're hurting.
Right.
But the macroeconomic metrics are absolutely glowing. Like the GDP statistics indicate a growing, robust economy.
Oh, yeah. The productivity numbers soar because the cognitive output per worker has never been higher.
Right.
Shareholder reports look fantastic. The systemic view portrays a thriving, healthy society.
It's all green lights.
Exactly. All green lights. And the friction occurs because the system is telling the worker, hey, you are more efficient and valuable than ever as a unit of production.
Right.
But while they're hearing that, the worker knows deep down that their unique, irreplaceable human value has basically been commoditized.
That is just, it's wild.
Wow.
And the phrase the text uses to describe this resulting state is inarticulate grief.
Inarticulate grief, yes.
I keep turning that phrase over in my head. Like, it's such a specific, haunting way to describe it.
It really is.
The feeling of being replaced by something that doesn't even have a physical body. Like you're operating in a supposedly booming economy.
Right.
Your company's stock is up. You're supposed to be grateful you even have a job.
Brett, you should be happy.
Yeah, but instead you're grieving.
Yeah.
And you don't even have the vocabulary to explain why.
And that lack of vocabulary is exactly what makes it a crisis. Because people are experiencing a localized tragedy in their own minds. They feel a deep sense of anger and emptiness. But all the traditional indicators tell them they should be thriving.
Like they're crazy for feeling bad.
Exactly. And the text highlights this dissonance perfectly. The quote is, "No one told me what to do about it, and no one is listening."
Wow. No one is listening.
Because the worker is mourning the loss of their specialized identity, right?
Yeah.
But society doesn't recognize that loss as legitimate because, hey, the paycheck hasn't necessarily stopped yet.
Right. Why are you complaining, right? You're still getting paid.
Exactly.
So what does it look like when millions of people are simultaneously feeling a grief that they can't even articulate?
Wow.
Because it doesn't just dissipate, right? It aggregates.
It aggregates. That's the perfect word.
And this is where the source material transitions from analyzing, individual psychology to examining the broader societal fallout.
Right.
That inarticulate grief, it becomes the emotional substrate for political backlash.
Oh, absolutely. And the mechanics of political messaging, they rely really heavily on these unaddressed emotional states.
Right. Now, I want to frame this really carefully for our listeners because the source material dives into political populism and nationalism here.
Yes.
And as always, we want to be clear that we aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoints. We're strictly looking at the mechanics of the arguments laid out in the text.
Right. We're just reporting on the phenomenon.
Exactly. But it's fascinating because politics is rarely about, rationality or GDP charts.
No, never.
It's about dignity, recognition, and place.
Exactly. The text argues that political movements are driven by a human need for dignity and a secure place in the social order.
Right.
So when people feel their identity dissolving, they actively seek out narratives that validate their loss.
Right. They want someone to say, hey, you're right to be mad.
Exactly. And that leads to the emergence of what the text calls political entrepreneurs.
Political entrepreneurs.
Yeah. These are figures who tap directly into that well of inarticulate grief, and they finally give the worker a vocabulary for their anger.
Interesting.
They build a platform on the idea that the elites don't care, the tech companies are stealing the future, and the system is fundamentally rigged to strip away the working professional's way of life.
Right. So the politician comes in and says, look, I see your grief, I know why you're hurting, and here's who's to blame.
Exactly. And the most challenging claim the source makes regarding these political entrepreneurs is that they are actually accurately diagnosing the emotional reality of the electorate.
Wow.
Yeah, like they are identifying the grief and the loss of meaning that the traditional economic metrics just completely ignored.
Okay, so the grief is entirely real.
Very real.
And the exploitation of that grief by political figures is incredibly effective. Because it's essentially the only narrative in the public sphere that validates the worker's internal pain.
Exactly. Think about it from the worker's perspective. The GDP numbers on the news say, you're fine, but the populist narrative says, you have been robbed.
And the latter feels much truer to the person who's actually experiencing that identity dissolution.
Completely. And this creates a highly, highly volatile political environment.
I can imagine.
Because the inarticulate grief serves as the fuel, right?
Right.
And the political rhetoric is the engine.
Wow.
And the resulting backlash is just entirely unpredictable.
Right.
The text suggests that rising populist movements aren't just, random cyclical swings in voter preference.
Okay.
They are direct, symptomatic responses to a crisis of meaning and the cognitive compression of the middle class.
That is it's wild to think about. We're looking at a system where the loss of personal identity directly translates into collective political anger.
Yeah.
And just as you start to wrap your head around that dynamic, the source material introduces this massive geopolitical complication that just accelerates the whole process.
Oh, yeah. It shifts everything.
Because it forces us to ask if the origin of the AI itself changes the psychological impact on the worker. Like, does it matter where the machine comes from?
And according to the text, the geographical origin changes the dynamic immensely.
Okay.
It introduces this concept of a national cushion.
National cushion.
Yeah. Historically, this cushion mitigates the pain of economic disruption. So if a domestic industry automates, the workers who lose out can still latch on to a broader national narrative, right?
Okay.
They might suffer individually, but they can kind of rationalize it by saying, well, at least my country is leading the technological revolution.
Right.
Our domestic companies are capturing the financial upside, and our national economy is asserting global dominance.
Okay, let's try to use an analogy to make that national cushion a bit more visceral.
Good idea.
Imagine you're a star player on your hometown sports team.
Okay.
Right. You've spent your whole life training to master your specific position.
Thousands of hours.
Exactly. And one day, management just cuts you. because they've built a machine that plays the game flawlessly.
Oh, that would hurt.
Right. You experience that painful identity dissolution.
Right.
But if that machine was designed in your hometown, built by your neighbors, and it's bringing championships to your city, you might be able to kind of swallow your pride.
You'd still hate it, but...
Right. You can tell yourself that, well, while it stinks for my career, at least my city is winning.
Exactly. That's the cushion.
Right.
But the problem highlighted in the source is that the current AI paradigm is just shattering that national cushion.
How so?
Well, the text specifically references the rise of Eastern open-weight models.
Right.
These are highly capable AI systems where the underlying architecture and all the parameters, they're just freely available to download and modify.
Yeah.
And they are increasingly originating from geopolitical competitors, specifically China.
Wow. Okay. This was actually the major, moment for me when I was reading this.
Yeah.
Because the text uses this phrase, the trade deficit in cognitive services.
Yes, such a powerful concept.
Because when the commodity AI that's replacing your expertise isn't domestic, but it's instead a free model imported from a foreign rival,
Right.
that psychological safety net just completely vanishes.
Completely. Because the value isn't being captured by local shareholders or domestic tech giants anymore.
Right.
It's being diffused globally, while the cognitive superiority essentially rests elsewhere.
Right.
The workers' realization is just stark. They're being commoditized by a foreign model that costs nothing.
Gosh. So returning to our sports analogy,
Yeah.
it's like getting cut from your team, but the machine replacing you was imported from your biggest rival city for free.
Yes.
And to make it even worse, your local mayor is using your tax dollars to subsidize the electricity for the stadium that the foreign machine plays in.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because the text points out this bitter irony that our own governments are, subsidizing the massive data centers required to run the very infrastructure that is hollowing out the domestic professional class.
Exactly. It's a double blow. The worker is left staring at a scenario where their own companies are laying them off to implement a foreign open-weight model.
Right.
And they're supposed to somehow feel pride in a surging trade deficit in cognitive services. It doesn't work.
It's insane.
The national narrative of, quote, we are winning, it breaks down entirely because the evidence of foreign cognitive dominance is literally sitting right on their desktop.
Wow. Which fuses two incredibly potent anxieties together.
Yes.
You have the economic anxiety of cognitive compression.
Right, the expertise being worth less.
Exactly. Crashing directly into the nationalist anxiety of foreign competition and dependency.
Right.
And the source material refers to this specific combination as the perfect populist narrative.
It is. It's a politically explosive combination. Because the text notes that the mechanics of this shift are very real. What they call the Western cognitive premium,
Okay.
which is the historical advantage held by professional classes in developed nations, it's rapidly compressed.
Impressing, right.
Because these Eastern open-weight models are successfully capturing the commodity tier of these cognitive services.
They're doing the work.
Exactly. Proving they can perform the work at scale for practically zero cost.
Gosh. So we really have to look at the massive societal feedback loop this creates.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to the core of our open exploration today.
Yeah.
We are watching a chain reaction unfold in real time.
We really are.
If this narrative of being hollowed out by foreign AI takes hold and is fueled by this very real, inarticulate grief and these undeniable geopolitical shifts,
Right.
how do societies actually react?
Well, the predicted political response, according to the text, is a hard pivot toward protectionism.
Protectionism.
Yeah. Societies experiencing this kind of dual economic and nationalist anxiety, they will attempt to throw up walls.
Naturally.
Right. They will demand restrictive policies that are designed to block foreign models, limit data flows, and basically try to protect domestic cognitive labor.
Right. But the massive open question is whether it's even possible to implement those protections without breaking their own economies.
And that is the billion-dollar question.
Right, because we aren't trying to predict the exact legislation here.
No. Yeah.
But we need to look at the chain reaction the source lays out when nations try to shield their workforce from this new reality.
Right. And the text maps out what it calls the structural drag that inevitably follows protectionism in this context.
Structural drag. Okay, walk me through that.
So imagine a government successfully implements policies to restrict the use of highly efficient, completely free foreign AI models.
Okay. So they ban the cheap models.
Right. By definition, they're forcing their domestic industries to use slower, more expensive, or just less capable alternatives.
Right.
So they are intentionally slowing down their own AI build-out.
Ah, I see. It's an attempt to put a tourniquet on the loss of meaning.
It's exactly.
The political system is trying to save the dignity and the economic standing of the domestic worker by basically artificially banning the cheaper competitor.
Right. But slowing that build-out distorts the entire market.
Yeah.
It requires massive capital misallocation. You have to prop up legacy cognitive work, or you have to fund redundant domestic AI projects just to avoid using the foreign open-weight models.
Right. Spending money you didn't need to spend.
Exactly. And this distortion directly reduces the profound efficiency gains that AI was supposed to deliver to the broader economy in the first place.
Gosh, the profound irony here is just, well, it's almost tragic.
It really is.
In a desperate attempt to protect the psychological well-being and the social status of their citizens from, foreign AI commoditization, nations end up intentionally crippling the efficiency engine of the technology itself.
Right. The source summarizes it brilliantly, actually.
What does it say?
It says, the loop closes, the correction propagates, the drag becomes structural.
Wow. The drag becomes structural.
Yeah. The political system, driven by the inarticulate grief of its citizens, enacts policies that ultimately drag down the entire national economy.
Right.
They cut off the circulation to save the limb, but in doing so, they basically weaken the whole organism.
Wow. And we end up with this structural economic drag simply because we didn't have a metric for meaning in the first place.
Exactly.
Because our economic charts only measure output, we totally miss the psychological crisis until it metastasized into a geopolitical trade war that honestly slows down human progress.
It's all connected.
It shows how a deeply personal internal realization that, my expertise is worth less can scale up to completely distort global markets.
A huge feedback loop.
Yeah. And, we've spent this entire deep dive mapping out the mechanics of these loops.
We have.
We've looked at how devastating it is when machines remove the scarcity, and therefore the dignity, from our cognitive skills.
Right.
And how that sparks a crisis that basically cascades from the individual right up to international trade policy.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But in the spirit of open exploration, I want to leave you, the listener, with a totally different question to mull over.
Okay.
We have based our entire societal structure on the premise that a person's worth is tied to their expertise being rare and expensive.
Right.
But let's flip the lens for a second. If our collective sense of human dignity is so fragile that it utterly collapses the moment our cognitive skills are no longer scarce,
Yeah.
was our definition of meaning fundamentally flawed from the very beginning?
Yeah.
Like, if intelligence and cognition become abundant and completely free, what is the new narrative of self that we're going to have to invent